After today, Dad won't control anything anymore.
Arthur Pendleton. Good morning, Judge. Does your family know who you are?
The moment I walked into the courtroom, my daughter laughed under her breath. My son-in-law leaned toward his attorney and smiled like the case was already over. They thought they were about to have me declared mentally incompetent. They thought the judge would freeze my accounts, hand control of my property to them, and send me somewhere quiet where I could no longer interfere with their plans. Then the judge looked up. His face changed. The gavel slipped from his hand and struck the desk with a hard crack. He stared at me for several seconds, and finally whispered, "My God, Robert Whitmore." The scalpel. My daughter stopped smiling. My son-in-law looked confused. They had spent months treating me like a harmless old man. They were about to learn who I had been before I became their invisible grandfather. Before I tell you how that courtroom turned against them, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? What city or country are you in? Please tell me in the comments below. I always loved knowing how far these stories travel. I was 71 years old when my daughter tried to take control of my life. Her name was Claire Dalton. She was 42, polished, confident, and very good at looking compassionate when other people were watching. Her husband, Ethan Dalton, was 46 and worked in real estate development. He liked expensive watches, luxury cars, private clubs, and conversations where everyone knew how successful he was. 10 years earlier, my wife Margaret died after a long fight with cancer. We had been married for 44 years. After she was gone, our home in Connecticut felt too large and too quiet. Every room seemed to hold a memory I could not touch. Claire convinced me to move to California. She and Ethan owned a large property outside Los Angeles. At least that was how they described it. There was a main house with 6 bedrooms, a pool, a guest house, a long private drive, and enough landscaping to keep 3 gardeners busy every week. Claire told me the guest house would be perfect. "You'll be close to family," she said, "and you won't have to be alone." At the time, it sounded like love. I sold my Connecticut home and moved west. What Claire never understood was that the deal was more complicated than she thought. For the first few years, things were peaceful. Claire visited often. Ethan invited me to dinner. My grandson, Mason, was still young enough to knock on my door, just because he wanted to show me a baseball card or tell me about school. But slowly, everything changed. Claire became busier. Ethan became richer, or at least he appeared to, and I became part of the scenery. At Sunday dinner, they spoke around me instead of to me. If I offered an opinion, Ethan smiled the way people smile at a child who has wandered into an adult conversation. If I said I was tired, Claire told everyone it was because of my age. If I forgot where I left my reading glasses, she joked that my memory was getting scary. If I disagreed with Ethan about money, he acted as though the disagreement proved I did not understand modern business. My grandson Mason was different. He was 16 by then, tall, kind, and still willing to sit with me without checking his phone every 30 seconds. One Sunday, he asked me to come to his playoff game. "Grandpa, it's Friday night. I'm starting." I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. Ethan did not even look up from his phone. "Don't pressure him, Mason. Your grandfather needs his rest." I turned toward him. I said I'd go. Claire laughed softly. "Dad, he just means you've been tired lately." I had not been tired lately. That was the moment I noticed something I should have noticed earlier. They were not only dismissing me, they were building a story about me. At the time, I still thought it was arrogance. 3 days later, I learned it was preparation. Ethan came to my guest house carrying a bottle of red wine. The bottle probably cost $400. I could not drink it. My cardiologist had told me to avoid alcohol after my bypass surgery. Ethan knew that, So the wine was not a gift, it was a prop. He sat across from me and spent 5 minutes talking about family, loyalty, and how grateful he was that I lived nearby. Then he finally told me why he was there. He had a resort project in Ohio, a luxury development near a lake. Hotels, private villas, golf, conference space, the usual dream wrapped in expensive language. He said a permit delay had created a temporary cash problem. He needed $500,000. Not a gift, he said. A bridge loan. 6 months. He would repay $700,000. I listened carefully. Then I asked one question. If this deal is as safe as you say, why won't your bank give you the money? His smile faded. He told me banks move too slowly. I asked why his investors would not cover it. He said investors were complicated. I asked why he was offering me a 40% return in 6 months for something he called low risk. That was when his voice changed. Robert, I'm not asking you to audit me. I leaned back. No, you're asking me for $500,000. He stared at me. I said no, not maybe, not later. No, I explained that I was 71. My money was for retirement, medical care, and whatever remained of my life. I was not gambling it on a project I did not understand. The friendly expression disappeared from Ethan's face. He looked toward the windows. Then he said, "You do realize you live here because of us?" I almost laughed. Instead I asked, "Do I?" He missed the meaning. "You live on our property? We take care of you. Claire worries about you constantly, and you can't help us one time." There it was. Not a request, a debt he believed I owed. I told him my answer was final. He stood. At the door, he looked back and said, "You're making a mistake." Then he left. A week later, at 3 in the morning, I woke with pressure in my chest. Anyone who has had heart surgery knows that feeling. The mind goes cold before the body does. You start measuring every breath. I reached for my phone and called Claire. She answered after the 4th ring. "What is it, Dad?" "I'm having chest pain." There was silence. Then a tired sigh. "Did you take your medication?" "Yes." "Do you think it's serious?" "I don't know. That's why I'm calling." She told me she had a charity gala meeting early in the morning. Then she said, "If it's really that bad, call 911. She hung up. My daughter hung up on me while I was having chest pain. I sat on the edge of the bed for about 20 seconds. Then I called an ambulance. By sunrise, the doctors had ruled out a heart attack. It was angina, probably brought on by stress. They adjusted my medication and sent me home later that morning. On the ride back, I saw Claire's white Range Rover outside a luxury spa in Beverly Hills. No charity meeting, no emergency, just a spa. I did not confront her. That may sound strange, but I had spent most of my life studying people who lied for money. The first rule is simple. Never interrupt someone while they are showing you who they really are. The next morning, a courier arrived. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a legal petition. Claire Dalton and Ethan Dalton petitioners. Robert Whitmore, respondent. They were asking the court for an emergency conservatorship. They claimed I had dementia. They claimed I was paranoid. They claimed I was financially reckless. They claimed I was no longer capable of managing my property, medical decisions, or bank accounts. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. I sat at my kitchen table and read every page. Attached to the petition was a medical evaluation signed by a man named Dr. Curtis Hale. According to the report, Dr. Hale had examined me and found significant cognitive decline with paranoid features. There was only one problem. I had never met Dr. Curtis Hale. Not once. I read the document again. Then I walked to the main house. Claire and Ethan were beside the pool. The moment Claire saw the envelope, her face changed. Ethan recovered faster. He stood and gave me the expression of a concerned son-in-law. "Robert, we were going to talk to you." I held up the petition. "When?" Claire crossed her arms. "Dad, After what happened with your chest, we're worried. You're worried. So you had a doctor I've never met diagnose me with dementia. Ethan stepped closer. You forget things. Everyone forgets things. You've become suspicious. I became suspicious after you asked me for $500,000. Claire looked at Ethan. He looked back at me. That was the moment the performance ended. Ethan's voice dropped. See you in court, old man? I nodded. Then I went home. They thought I was frightened. I was not frightened. I was disappointed. And disappointment is much colder. There was a closet in the back bedroom of my guest house. Behind the coats was a false wall. Behind that wall was a locked room. Claire had never seen it. Ethan did not know it existed. Inside were file cabinets, encrypted drives, old case notes, 2 secure computers, and a framed photograph of Margaret sitting on the corner of the desk. For more than 30 years, before I retired, I worked as a forensic financial investigator for the Department of Justice. My job was to follow money, shell companies, fake invoices, bribery, securities fraud, hidden assets, political kickbacks, corporate theft. I worked cases involving executives, lobbyists, public officials, and men who believed they were too powerful to be touched. The nickname started in Washington. The scalpel. I never liked it, but it stayed. People said I could take a 1,000-page financial mess and find the one transaction that opened the entire case. I had retired early to care for Margaret during her illness. After she died, I stopped being the scalpel. I became a widower, then a grandfather, then, apparently, a helpless old man. That night, I picked up the phone and called Rachel Bennett. Rachel was an attorney in Washington. Her father had worked with me on federal cases years earlier. I had known her since she was a teenager. She was brilliant, disciplined, and almost impossible to intimidate. I sent her the petition. 45 minutes later, she called me. You've never met this doctor. Never. I'll call you back. An hour later, she did. Robert, Curtis Hale is not a neurologist. What is he? A dentist. I said nothing. Correction, she continued. He was a dentist. His license was permanently revoked 5 years ago. For what? Insurance fraud? Illegal prescriptions. He also pleaded guilty to running an opioid pill scheme through his clinic. I looked at the report again. A disgraced dentist had signed a dementia diagnosis. That was not enough. A fake doctor was useful. But I wanted to know why Ethan trusted him. I asked Rachel to send me everything she had. Then I started digging. Curtis Hale had been arrested 5 years earlier. His bail had been $100,000. The bond had been guaranteed by a shell company, Walsh Ridge Holdings. The name meant nothing at first. Then I checked the registration. Ethan had been the controlling member. I stared at the screen. That changed everything. Ethan had not found Curtis Hale after I rejected the loan. He had known him for 5 years. He had kept a compromised man close. A man with financial problems. A man with no professional license. A man who could be pressured. This was not a desperate plan created in 1 week. It was a contingency. And that meant Ethan had been thinking about control long before I understood the danger. So I stopped looking at the petition. I started looking at Ethan. His development companies were layered through limited partnerships and Delaware entities. On the surface, they were difficult to connect. But people repeat themselves. Passwords, email addresses, mailing addresses, accountants, phone numbers. Ethan had used the same personal email on multiple filings for years. That was enough. The Ohio resort appeared through one entity, then another, then another. Eventually, I found its financing documents connected to a private fund called Northbridge Capital Partners. Northbridge was not a patient lender. It specialized in distressed assets. It did not rescue bad deals. It bought them cheap and took them apart. The numbers on Ethan's project were ugly, very ugly. The resort was roughly $50 million over budget. Contractors had filed liens. 2 major suppliers had stopped work. The occupancy projections Ethan had shown investors were inflated. Cash reserves were almost gone, and Northbridge had issued an emergency capital call. $5 million. 10 business days. If Ethan failed, Northbridge could trigger cross-collateralization clauses. That meant it could seize not only the Ohio project, but other assets tied to Ethan's guarantees, the mansion, his investment properties, his company shares, possibly everything. Now the $500,000 made sense. He had not needed my money to finish the resort. He had needed it to buy time. And when I refused, he moved to the next plan. If the court declared me incompetent and made Claire conservator, they could control my accounts, my investments, my property, my trusts, my entire estate. $500,000 was never the real target. I was. But I still had one question. A man in financial collapse still needs cash to file a case like this. Attorneys cost money. Experts cost money. Bribes cost money. Where had Ethan found it? The answer was sitting in front of me. Margaret. After my wife died, I created the Margaret Whitmore Foundation for Cancer Research. I had funded it with several $1 million. Claire became managing director. I trusted her. That sentence is painful to say. I trusted her. I called the financial institution that managed the foundation. As founder, I retained inspection rights. The statements arrived that afternoon. The foundation should have held a little over $3 million. It held $418,000. I read that number 3 times. Then I opened the transaction history, consulting fees, event management, administrative reimbursements, vendor retainers. Most were fake. $150,000 went to an Ethan-controlled company for strategic consulting. $82,000 went to another shell for gala planning. Additional transfers were scattered through smaller vendors that all traced back to Ethan's network. But the most painful part was not the theft. It was the signatures. Claire's name was on every authorization. Not Ethan's, Claire's. My daughter had signed the money away from the charity built in her mother's name. I sat in that hidden office for a long time. There are moments when anger is too simple. I was not angry. I was grieving. Not Margaret, Claire. The daughter I thought I still had. I had spent weeks wondering whether Ethan was manipulating her. The signatures answered me. She was not standing beside the fire. She was feeding it. I called Rachel. We're changing strategy. How? We're not defending? There was a pause. What are we doing? We're building the criminal case. Rachel understood immediately. Over the next 4 days, we organized everything. The false medical report, the wire to Curtis Hale, the foundation transfers, the shell companies, the Ohio project, the emergency capital call. Then I asked Rachel a question. Who is running Northbridge now? She checked. Samuel Grant. I leaned back. I knew that name. 30 years earlier, Samuel had been a young commodities trader caught in a federal fraud investigation. The evidence looked terrible. Everyone wanted a quick indictment. I did not. One transaction bothered me. I kept digging. That transaction proved Samuel had been framed by a senior partner who used his account to hide unauthorized trades. Samuel was cleared. The partner went to prison. Samuel later built a fortune. Northbridge was part of it. He had once told me that if I ever needed a favor, I should call. I had never called. Until then, Samuel answered on the second ring. Robert Whitmore. Hello, Sam. He laughed once. I thought you were dead. Not yet. That sounds like trouble. It is. I explained only what he needed to know. Ethan's $5 million note was in default. Northbridge was preparing enforcement. I wanted to buy the debt. Samuel was silent. Then he asked, why? Family matter. He understood enough not to ask again. By the next day, a trust controlled by me had purchased the defaulted note. Ethan believed Northbridge still owned his debt. He believed he had days left to negotiate. He was wrong. He owed me, and he had no idea. Rachel prepared the foreclosure papers. I told her to hold them. Until when? The hearing. She smiled. For the first time in years, I pulled a charcoal suit from a garment bag. Margaret used to call it my Washington armor. On the morning of the conservatorship hearing, I tied my own tie slowly. I looked into the mirror. I did not see an old man. I saw someone I had forgotten. At the courthouse, Claire looked me up and down. Then she gave a nervous little laugh. Ethan smirked. "Nice suit?" I said nothing. Their attorney barely acknowledged me. Rachel walked beside me carrying one slim briefcase. When the judge entered, everyone stood. His name was Thomas Reed. I recognized him immediately. He was older, of course, gray hair, glasses, but I knew him. 30 years earlier, Thomas Reed had been a young assistant United States attorney on a huge corporate fraud case. The case was collapsing when I found the accounting trail that connected the executives to the hidden payments. Thomas used that evidence to win. The case made his career. I had not seen him in decades. He sat down, opened the file, looked at the respondent's name, then looked at me. His face went pale. His pen slipped from his hand. "Oh, Miss Stark, Whitmore." I stood. "Yes, Your Honor." He stared for another second. Then, forgetting the microphone was live, he whispered, "The scalpel." The entire room heard him. Ethan's smile vanished. Claire looked at me, not as her father, as a stranger. Judge Reed regained his composure. He turned toward Ethan's attorney. "I assume counsel understands the seriousness of the allegations in this petition." The attorney nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge glanced at me again. "Proceed." Curtis Hale was their first witness. He wore a conservative suit and spoke in a calm, professional voice. He described memory loss, confusion, paranoia, poor judgment. He said I was not capable of managing my affairs. Rachel stood. She carried one page. "Dr. Hale, what is your current medical specialty?" He hesitated. "Oh, I have a broad clinical background." That was not my question. "What is your current medical specialty?" His attorney objected. The judge overruled. Hale swallowed. "I previously practiced dentistry." "Previously." "Yes." "Are you currently licensed to practice dentistry?" "No." "Are you licensed as a psychologist?" "No." "A psychiatrist?" "No." "A neurologist?" "No." "Have you ever been licensed in any field that allows you to diagnose dementia?" "No." The courtroom changed. You could feel it. Rachel held up the report. "Yet you diagnosed Mr. Whitmore with dementia." Hale shifted in his chair. "I was providing an observational assessment." "You wrote, quote, significant cognitive decline consistent with progressive dementia. Did you write that?" "Yes." "How many times did you examine Mr. Whitmore?" Silence. Rachel repeated the question. "How many times?" Hale looked toward Ethan. "Answer." Judge Reed said. "None." Claire closed her eyes. Ethan stared straight ahead. Rachel placed another document on the screen. 3 days before you signed this report, Walsh Ridge Holdings wired you $25,000. Correct? Hale's face collapsed. His lawyer stood. The judge ordered him to sit. Hale tried to consult him. He said it was consulting. He said it was unrelated. He said he had been under pressure. Every answer made it worse. Judge Reed stopped the hearing and referred the testimony for immediate investigation. Court security escorted Hale out. Ethan's attorney asked for a recess. The judge denied it. Then Ethan made a mistake. He insisted on testifying. Arrogant men often believe they can talk their way out of a document. Rachel let him try. He told the court he loved me. He said he worried about my health. He said the conservatorship was about protection, not money. Rachel nodded politely. Then she asked, "Mr. Dalton, did you request a $500,000 loan from Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes." "But that was unrelated? Was that before or after you decided he was mentally incompetent?" Ethan paused. "Before." "So you believed a mentally incompetent 71-year-old man was capable of evaluating a $500,000 investment?" He frowned. "That is not what I said." Rachel continued. "You offered him $700,000 in repayment after 6 months." "Yes." "Why such a high return?" "It was a good opportunity." "For whom?" He looked annoyed. Rachel displayed Northbridge's capital notice. "Your Ohio resort was $50 million over budget, correct?" "No." She showed contractor filings. 27 liens, correct? Construction disputes. Your lenders issued a $5 million emergency capital call, correct? Ethan's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes, and you were facing default. We were negotiating." "Were you personally liable under cross-collateral guarantees?" He did not answer. The judge told him to answer. "Yes." Rachel waited. Then she asked the question that broke the room open. "Mr. Dalton, while facing that default, where did you get the money to pay your attorneys, pay Curtis Hale, and continue funding your project?" Ethan said nothing. Rachel turned toward Claire, then back to him. "Would the Margaret Whitmore Foundation be a familiar name?" Claire made a small sound. Not a word. Just a breath. Rachel placed the foundation records on the screen. Ethan's attorney asked for another recess. Denied. Rachel read the transfers. $150,000. $82,000. Additional payments. Then she showed the authorizations. Claire's signatures. My daughter looked at the screen and began to cry. Ethan leaned toward her. She moved away. For the first time, the two of them were no longer a team. Ethan's voice rose. He blamed the accountants. He blamed administrative errors. He blamed Claire. Then he blamed me. If he had just helped us, none of this would have happened. The courtroom went silent. Judge Reed looked at him. "You are saying this happened because Mr. Whitmore refused to give you money." Ethan realized too late what he had admitted. Rachel sat down. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Whitmore, do you wish to respond to the allegations concerning your capacity?" I stood. "No, Your Honor." He looked surprised. I continued. "I did not come here to prove I am sane." I looked at Claire, then Ethan. "I came to file a criminal complaint." Rachel handed copies to the clerk. I explained the foundation theft, the false medical evaluation, the payment to Hale, the shell companies, the attempt to obtain control over my assets through a fraudulent conservatorship. Claire was crying openly now. "Dad, I didn't understand what he was doing." I looked at her. "The signatures are yours." I trusted him. So did I. That hurt her more than yelling would have. Ethan suddenly laughed. It was not amusement. It was panic. "You think you've won? You're still an old man living in a guest house." I looked at Rachel. She opened her briefcase. Then she walked across the courtroom and placed a thick packet in front of Ethan's attorney. The attorney read the first page. His face changed. Ethan grabbed it. "What is this?" Rachel answered calmly. "Notice of default, acceleration, and foreclosure." Ethan looked toward his lawyer. His lawyer kept reading. Ethan said, "Northbridge can't do this yet." I spoke. "Northbridge isn't doing it." He looked at me. I continued. "They sold the note." "To who?" I let the silence sit. "To me." For the first time since I had known Ethan, he had nothing to say. The $5 million debt he thought he could negotiate now belonged to me. The collateral attached to that debt included business interests, investment properties, vehicles, and his rights connected to the California estate. And there was one more detail. The mansion sat partly on land he did not own, my land. The 99-year lease contained a default clause tied to fraud and insolvency. Ethan had signed it himself, years earlier, without reading it carefully. I had. Judge Reed looked at the paperwork. Then he looked at Ethan. The conservatorship hearing was effectively over. The fraud investigation had just begun. What followed took months. Federal investigators became involved because of wire transfers and investor statements connected to the Ohio project. State investigators examined the foundation. Prosecutors interviewed contractors. Banks turned over records. Curtis Hale reached a cooperation agreement and admitted Ethan paid him to create the false medical report. He also admitted Ethan had kept contact with him for years because Ethan knew he was financially desperate. That testimony confirmed what I already knew. I had not been facing one bad decision. I had been facing a plan. Ethan rejected several plea offers. He believed he could still win at trial. He was convicted on multiple counts involving wire fraud, securities fraud, charitable embezzlement, and conspiracy. He received a lengthy prison sentence. I did not attend the sentencing. I had seen enough. Claire's case was different. Her attorney called me. He asked whether I would write a letter saying Ethan had controlled her. I refused. Claire had signed every transfer. She had watched me be mocked. She had ignored me when I called with chest pain. She had participated in a petition claiming I was mentally incompetent. She had chosen comfort over questions every time the truth became inconvenient. Eventually, she pleaded guilty to misuse of charitable funds. She received probation, restitution, and thousands of hours of court-ordered community service. Part of that service was assigned through a long-term care facility that worked with dementia patients. The irony was painful. She spent months feeding, helping, and sitting with people who truly had lost parts of their memory and independence. People whose condition she had once used as a weapon against me. 6 months after the courtroom hearing, the mansion was empty. Ethan's interest in it was gone. The property was sold. I sold the guest house as well. I did not need the place anymore. Half the proceeds helped rebuild the Margaret Whitmore Foundation under independent management. The other half went into a protected trust for Mason. He could not touch the principal until he turned 25. I wanted him to have a future. But I also wanted him to understand money before money had the chance to understand him. Mason visited me while I was packing. He stood in the hidden office and looked around at the files. "Grandpa, were you really called the Scalpel?" I smiled. "Unfortunately." He laughed. Then his expression became serious. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I looked at Margaret's photograph. "Because I wanted to be your grandfather. Not a story." Mason hugged me. It was the first uncomplicated moment I had experienced in months. 2 days later, Claire came to see me. She looked different. No designer clothes. No perfect hair. No jewelry. She wore a faded volunteer uniform and carried herself like someone who had finally discovered how heavy consequences could be. She stood in the doorway. "Can I come in?" I nodded. She looked around the empty guest house. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "Why did you let it go so far?" I did not answer immediately. She continued. "You could have stopped us before court. You could have shown me the documents. You could have told me who you were. You could have scared Ethan off." "Yes. Then why didn't you?" I sat down. "Because if I had saved you one more time, you would have learned nothing." She looked at me. "When you were 10, you stole $50 from your mother's purse." Her face changed. She remembered. "Margaret found out. She was hurt, but she forgave you immediately. Then she quietly replaced the money herself because you said you had already spent it." Claire sat across from me. "I remember." "You never repaid her." She looked down. "I was 10. "Yes." "And then you were 16 when you crashed the car and blamed your friend. Your mother handled it. You were 24 when you ran up a credit card and I paid it. You were 31 when Ethan's first company nearly failed, and we helped you both." Claire started crying. I continued quietly. "Every time there was a cost, Someone else paid it. That doesn't mean I wanted this. No. But you kept making choices because you believed someone would fix them. She wiped her face. I said, the books always balance eventually. That was something Margaret used to say. Not about accounting. About life. Claire looked toward the floor. I don't have anywhere to go. I had expected that. I handed her an envelope. Inside was the address of a small apartment. She looked at me. What happens after 3 months? You take care of yourself? Her mouth trembled. Are you cutting me off? No. I shook my head. I'm stopping myself from preventing you from becoming an adult. She held the envelope tightly. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. That was the hardest part. People think consequences erase love. They do not. Sometimes love is exactly what makes consequences unbearable. Claire stood. At the door, she turned back. Do you hate me? No. That answer surprised her. I continued. I hate what you chose. I hate what you did to your mother's foundation. I hate that you tried to use my age against me. But you are still my daughter. She started crying again. I said, what happens next is up to you. Then she left. I watched her walk down the driveway. I did not call her back. I am 71 years old. I have retired twice. The first time, I retired from a career built on exposing people who thought money could protect them. The second time, I retired from being the silent old man who believed patience meant accepting disrespect. I learned something late in life. Silence is not always strength. Sometimes silence is permission. If people mistreat you and you never draw a line, they stop seeing the line. They keep moving. One insult becomes a joke. One joke becomes a habit. One habit becomes a story about who you are. And eventually, they may start believing that story more than they believe you. Claire and Ethan believed I was weak because I was quiet. They believed I was confused because I did not argue. They believed I was helpless because I did not show them every card in my hand. They were wrong. Real strength is not about shouting first. It is about knowing when to speak, knowing when to wait, knowing what matters, and when the moment comes, moving without hesitation. People later asked whether I felt satisfied when Ethan was convicted. Not really. I lost the family I thought I had. Claire lost years of trust. Mason lost the home he grew up in. A foundation built in Margaret's memory nearly disappeared. There was no celebration in that. But there was balance, and balance mattered to me. I did not destroy Ethan's life. He built the machine that destroyed it. I only stopped standing in front of the consequences. I did not ruin Claire. I stopped paying the price for her choices. There is a difference. Today, the Margaret Whitmore Foundation is healthy again. It has independent trustees. Every transaction is audited. No family member controls it alone. Mason is finishing school and still calls me every Sunday. Claire is working, really working. We speak occasionally, not often. Trust does not return because someone says sorry. It returns in pieces, sometimes painfully, sometimes never completely. But I have learned not to force it. As for me, I moved back east, not to the old Connecticut house. That chapter is gone. I bought a smaller place near the water. 2 bedrooms, a simple kitchen, a desk by the window. Margaret's photograph sits there. Some mornings, I make coffee and watch the light move across the water. There are no hidden rooms, no encrypted monitors, no court files. I do not need them anymore. But I kept one thing from that old office. A black fountain pen. I used it through most of my career. The pen that signed reports, affidavits, and case summaries. The pen I stopped using when Margaret got sick. The pen I carried into court the day my family tried to prove I had lost my mind. It sits on my desk now. Not because I expect another war, because it reminds me of something I almost forgot. You are allowed to be kind without becoming easy to use. You are allowed to forgive without pretending nothing happened. You are allowed to love someone and still refuse to protect them from every consequence. And no matter how old you become, nobody gets to decide you are finished just because they stopped paying attention. My family thought they were putting a confused old man in a cage. Instead, they reminded me who I was. I did not want revenge. I wanted the truth on the record. I wanted Margaret's name protected. I wanted my grandson protected. I wanted my own life back. And in the end, the books balanced. If you stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you for listening. I truly appreciate your time. If this story made you think, please give the video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to tell me where you're listening from, because I love seeing how far these stories reach. Subscribe or follow for more stories like this, and I'll see you in the next video.